Morning, students. Lecture for today is Theories of Growth. Coming to the introduction, what does a theory mean? A theory is a set of statements or principles devised to explain a group of facts or phenomena, especially one that has been repeatedly tested or is widely accepted and can be used to make predictions about natural phenomena. Why do we need to study about theories of growth in orthodontics? So orthodontists are orthopedic surgeons of the craniofacial complex and are involved in the treatment of not just the dentition but the entire dentofacial complex. So how can we fix something if you don't know how it works? If you want to treat the craniofacial region, if you don't know how the structures grow, how do we can treat it? So this led to the formulation of a series of competing hypotheses or theories and even paradigms that sought to find the holy grail of craniofacial biology. The search for a single theory of craniofacial growth that is both biologically accurate and clinically effective, which led to the development of the series of theories from 1930s to 2000, from remodeling theory till the growth relativity hypothesis. We will see each one in detail. So what does remodeling theory say? So this theory was introduced by J.C. Brash in 1930s. This theory postulated that all of the craniofacial skeletal growth occurs exclusively by selective addition and resorption of bone at its surface. So this was the first theory of craniofacial growth. As you can see in the picture, that's a picture of a cranial wall or a skull bone where there is bone deposition over the exterior surface of the bone, which is depicted there by the positive sign, and from inside there is resorption, which is marked there in negative sign. So according to Brash, this is how growth happens. So there were some questions which was unanswered by his theory. So he says only the growth happens through resorption and deposition. Then why these sutures or these cranio-based synchondrosis, which is present in the cranial base, the mandibular condylar cartilage? So why all these structures are present if the bone growth takes only through bone resorption and bone deposition? Why are these structures present in the craniofacial region? Does it have any significance? It was unanswered by the theory. The next came the genetic theory by Brodie in 1941. His theory stated that the craniofacial growth is largely inherited, intrinsically regulated, and genetically predetermined. According to him, the growth was genetically controlled. So it was more assumed than proven. The next theory is sutural theory by Fisher and Weinman. So according to him, the connective tissue and the sutures of the craniofacial skeleton are the principal locations at which intrinsic, genetically regulated primary growth of bone takes place. So according to him, sutures are the one which control growth. So he explained that with the help of all these sutures of craniofacial region, the growth of cranial vault, he explained how it happens. So according to him, the intrinsic pattern of expansive proliferative growth by sutures, sutural connective tissue that is present at the sagittal suture, the lambdoid suture or the coronal suture, because of the growth of this suture forces the bone of the wall to grow apart, which will help in the enlargement of the cranium. So likewise, the growth of the midface was explained by him like that. The circummaxillary suture was responsible for growth of the midface or the craniofacial region. Midface, mainly the growth of circummaxillary suture pushed the midface downward and forward because of growth at the circummaxillary suture. So again, why this theory was rejected? Because some authors proved or asked some questions like the first one was, if the craniofacial sutures are the primary growth centers, then how this condition of microcephaly happens? You can see in the picture, there is a small head. The situation happens because of the early fusion of the sutures. So sutures have got ingrowth potential, which is genetically determined. How does this situation happen? The next one is the subcutaneous autotransplantation of zygomatic-maxillary suture area in the guinea pig has not been found to grow. It suggests that there is a lack of innate growth potential. A small part of the zygomatic-maxillary suture of the face was transplanted, auto-transplanted under the skin of guinea pig. But as per structural theory by Fisher, if this structure has got innate growth potential or genetically determined growth, this structure should have grown, but it didn't. Also, in cleft cases, growth continues even in absence of suture. Okay, so all these questions were unanswered. That's the reason why this theory was rejected. The next theory came was nasal septal theory or cartilaginous theory by James Scott. So according to Scott, the cartilages are the structures which are responsible for craniofacial growth. They are the primary growth centers. So according to Scott, there are different cartilaginous structures present in the craniofacial region. The synchondrosis, which is present in the cranial base. Another one is the nasal septal cartilage of the midface, then the condylar cartilage of the mandible. All these structures are responsible for growth, according to Scott. What are cranial base synchondrosis? These are the cartilaginous joints present at the cranial base, which is responsible for the growth of entire midface as well as the cranium. So there are different synchondrosis present. The intersphenoidal, pheno-occipital, phenoethmoidal, intra-occipital, all these different synchondrosis used at different age. The nasal septal cartilage, he explained the role of nasal septal cartilage in the growth of the midface. So he says the nasal septal cartilage is a pacemaker for growth of entire nasomaxillary complex. So he explained the antero-inferior expansive growth of the nasal septal cartilage, which is buttressed against the cranial base posteriorly, which led to the downward and forward movement of the midface. So this is how he explained the role of nasal septal cartilage in midfacial growth. The next one is the growth of the mandible. He explained with the help of the condylar cartilage, which will lead to the downward and forward growth of the mandible by an upward thrust created at the temporomandibular joint by the growth of the condyle. So this is how mandible grows. So the favorable fact for his theory was he did some experiments by removing the nasal septal cartilage of nose or the snout region of the rabbit, and he found out that after removing the nasal septal cartilage, the growth reduces of the midface. So he suggested there is a role of nasal septal cartilage in midfacial growth. Another fact which was supporting was this was a man who met up with an accident at his early age, during his 8 years of age, and accidentally he had to remove the nasal septum, which led to the underdevelopment of midface in later ages. So this was also another fact which was supporting the cartilaginous theory of Scott. The evidence which was against the theory was Melvin Moss, the author. He found out that the underdevelopment of the midface of the rabbit has happened not because of removing the nasal septum. Rather, it was caused because of the trauma created during removing the nasal septum, which led to the reduced blood supply and underdevelopment, not the nasal septum which was responsible. Another point was the bilateral condylectomy, or removing the condyles, both the condyles. It doesn't have any appreciable effect on the growth of the rest of the mandible in humans later on. If we have to remove the bilateral condyles, both the condyles early age, but it didn't have any effect on the rest of the mandible by the growth later on. So this was the 2 points which was against the theory. The next came the functional matrix hypothesis, which is the most accepted theory in orthodontics. It was introduced by Melvin Moss in 1962. The theory states that the growth of the face occurs as a response to functional needs and neurotrophic influences and is mediated by soft tissue in which jaws are embedded. So according to his theory, the growth of the face or the growth of the skeletal structures is secondary to the functional needs, and it is not controlled by the bone or the skeletal structures itself, but the non-skeletal tissues. So according to Moss, the bones do not grow by their own. Bones are being grown by the adjacent structures. Which are the adjacent structures? The soft tissues like the muscles, the remaining tissue spaces. So all these non-skeletal tissues was responsible for the growth of the bone. This is what Melvin Moss says. He explained a term called as functional cranial component. So what is a functional cranial component, or FCC? So all the organs, the tissues and the tissue spaces which is taking part to perform a single function is called as a functional cranial component. So for example, if you take a function like mastication as an example, what are the structures involved there? There are skeletal structures like jaws, maxilla and mandible. There are non-skeletal tissues like muscles, the soft tissues which is responsible there, the muscles of mastication. Then the entire tissue spaces like the oral cavity or the pharyngeal region which is responsible. So all these skeletal tissues, the non-skeletal tissues and the tissue spaces was responsible to perform a single function of mastication. So all these structures combinedly are called as a functional cranial component. I will explain with the help of a diagrammatic representation. The functional cranial component is again subdivided by Moss into two structures, the skeletal unit and the functional matrix. The skeletal units are again further divided into microskeletal units and macroskeletal units. So what is a microskeletal unit? As you can see in the picture, we take mandible as an example. There are small structures which is present on the mandible which are combined together to form a bigger mandible single bone. So all those smaller parts, examples are the coronoid, the condyle, the body, the ramus, the alveolar segments, the symphysis, all these small parts combined together to form a bigger bone called mandible, which is a macroskeleton. So the small microskeletal units combine to form a bigger macroskeleton. So that is an example. Again, what is a functional matrix? He subdivided it into periosteal matrix and capsular matrix. Periosteal matrix include the teeth, the muscles, or the smaller structures like the glands, the nerves, the vessels. All these are periosteal structures, which are in direct relation to the microskeletal unit. Okay, the structures which are responsible for the growth in relation to the macroskeletal units are called the capsular matrix, the orofacial and the neurocranial capsule. There are two types of capsules which we explained in the craniofacial region. I will explain in detail the capsular matrix, which is very difficult to understand also. So what does a capsular matrix say? So what is a capsular matrix? These are the organs and the spaces that occupy a broader anatomic complex, exist as a volume. Means, like an example, you can see here the neurocranial capsule. So that entire capsule includes the scalp, the calvarial bone, as well as the brain. All these structures individually called as a neurocranial capsule, which is responsible for the growth of brain there. Likewise, orofacial capsule, which is also an example of a capsular matrix, where the stimulation of growth is directly in relation to macroskeletal units. Okay, the function which is happening there is the orofacial capsule will lead to the change in form or change in function of the macroskeletal unit, the maxilla or mandible as such. Okay. Now, the fact which was supporting functional matrix hypothesis was, so the conditions of microcephaly or hydrocephaly or scafocephaly, all these were able to explain with the help of functional matrix hypothesis. I was explaining what is microcephaly, the small head because of the early fusion of the feature. So according to functional matrix hypothesis, because of this early fusion of the features of cranial region, there is underdevelopment of the brain and a small head. Okay, hydrocephaly, what is the reason? It is the fluid filled within the cranium, which is causing an expansion happening at the cranial bones to make the head look very bigger. Another condition. Also, an enlarged eye or a small eye will cause corresponding change in the size of orbital cavity. There is a big eye, the cavity will be bigger. Small eye, the cavity will be smaller. Likewise, teeth and the alveolar bone. Alveolar bone is only present if teeth is there. If teeth is not there, then alveolar bone itself is not there. So, one structure in relation to the other. These were the facts which were supporting functional matrix hypothesis. The next theory was Van Limburg hypothesis, given by Van Limburg in 1970. And it is a multifactorial theory. This theory is not an individual theory as such. It is a combination of three previously explained theories: the structural theory, the cartilaginous theory, and the functional matrix theory. So Van Limburg put all the positive findings of all these three theories and he made a hypothesis, Van Limburg hypothesis, including 5 factors. So there are 5 factors according to Van Limburg which control the growth. The intrinsic genetic factors. There are 2 epigenetic factors, one local and one general. 2 environmental factors also, local and general. So what are these factors mean? So intrinsic genetic factors means the genetic factors inherent within the skull, which we can't control much. The genetic factors which is involved in the skull lead to the development of growth. Second one is local epigenetic factors. They are genetic control from adjacent structures like brain, eyes. The growth of this brain or eyes will lead to there is a structural change in the craniofacial region. So they are local epigenetic factors. You have to be concentrating on the term, the local and general. What does it mean? Now, general epigenetic factors are genetic control from distant structures. They are in general. So what is it? For example, is growth hormone, sex hormone. All these hormones have a effect on growth. So all these are general epigenetic factors. Local means it is locating near to that structure, development of that structure. If the midface has to grow, means there should be some local epigenetic factors from the nearby structures like brain or eyes have a role in that. Now, local environmental factors. What are local environmental factors? They are local non-genetic influence from environment, like example, habit, muscle force. The person who is having a tongue thrusting habit or a thumb sucking habit will have adverse effect on the maxilla as well as the mandible or the dentition. Likewise. Now, what are general environmental factors? They are general non-genetic influence from the environment, like example, nutrition, oxygen supply. If there is lack of nutrition, lack of development, lack of growth. So these are general environmental factors. So you have to categorize under 5 factors, 2 epigenetic, 2 environmental, and 1 genetic factor, which includes the 5 factors in Mandelbrot theory. The next theory was Enlow's expanding V principle by Donald Enlow in 1963. The name itself has the term called the V. So growth of bone occurs in form of a V according to Enlow, and bone deposition takes place along the inner side and the wider outer ends of the V with resorption on the outer side. So according to him, most of the craniofacial bones grow in the shape of V with deposition happening from inside and at the towards the end and resorption happening at the outer side. So the structures which is showing Enlow's growth of V principle are the mandibular body, the condyle, the coronoid, the palate. So as per Enlow, most of the craniofacial structures grow in the shape of V. Next theory is Enlow's counterpart principle. It is again given by Donald Enlow himself. So it explains that growth of one bone has influence on its adjoint bone, which is called counterpart. Okay, and this controls the growth and proportional relationship with its counterpart, means the growth of one part have an effect on the other. For example, the nasomaxillary complex, which is present at the midface, is a counterpart of cranial fossa, anterior cranial fossa. When the anterior cranial fossa grows, it also leads to the growth of the nasomaxillary complex. Likewise, the growth of maxilla will lead to the growth of mandible. Also, the tuberosity area of upper jaw will lead to the growth of the tuberosity area of the lower jaw. So, all these are counterparts. Now, what is servo system theory? This is another theory given by Alexander Petrovich in 1970s. This theory is based on cybernetics. So, what does cybernetics mean? The science of control and communication in biological, electronic, and mechanical systems. This includes analysis of feedback mechanics that serve to govern or modify the actions of various systems. So, according to Alexander Petrovich, the growth happening all over the body or the craniofacial region is controlled by a feedback mechanism. Okay, I will explain with the help of a diagrammatic representation. So this is a diagrammatic representation where I have explained a scenario. So just assume that the maxilla. So we will take the maxilla as the reference input. Just consider that the maxilla in the dental arch is little bit far ahead, positioned little bit in front anteriorly. Okay, and just assume that the lower jaw is positioned little bit towards backside or retrognathic or retropositioned. So just assume like that. So there is a change. There is a change in occlusion because one jaw is placed forward, another jaw is placed backward. So this maxilla, just consider this as the reference input. So there is a change in occlusion because of both jaw placed one front and one back. So there is a occlusal derangement happening. This is the comparator or the comparing fact between the relationship of both the jaws. So what will it cause? So there is an forces, occlusal forces or the muscular forces which is altered. It is not in an ideal occlusion, it is altered. So it will lead to problem with the mastication. There will be premature contact, there will be pain over the condyle. All these masticatory performance is altered because of the difference in position of the both the jaws, maxilla in front and mandible in back. So what does it give? So this will give a deviation signal. According to Alexander Petrovic, I told it is a feedback mechanism. So there is one alteration in function happening there. There's a problem with mastication. So what does it, our body will, the muscle or the entire masticatory muscle will give a deviation signal to the brain saying that there is a problem happening at the orofacial region, whereas one jaw is forwardly placed and one is in backwardly placed, and we are having one masticatory problem there. So this is the deviation signal which is being sent to the brain. So this brain will automatically give a feedback to the lateral pterygoid muscle saying that the mandible is backwardly placed. We have to go in front to catch up with the maxilla. The reference, we have to go ahead with the maxilla so that the occlusal problem will be corrected. So what does it will give? It will give automatically give another feedback mechanism for the release of hormones like the stromatolin hormones and the growth hormones, which will act on the condyle, which will lead to growth of the mandible, and mandible will catch up with the maxilla to come in front and have an ideal occlusion. So this is how our body find out one problem and it corrects by itself. This is a feedback mechanism as per servo system theory says by Alexander Petrovic. Okay. There are some drawbacks of this theory also. What was the drawback? One is the importance of hormones. Why the hormone is much important there? Without the hormones, will the growth is going to happen or not? The second one is peripheral comparator. I told the occlusion was the comparing factor between the maxilla and the mandible. So the discrepancies may be overcome by dento-alveolar changes. So if according to him, if the body himself will have a feedback mechanism and he says that where in a class 2 retrognathing mandible case, the mandible itself will come because of the feedback mechanism. But then why this dento-alveolar compensation seen in such cases? In a class 2 cases, where there is retrognathing mandible is there, the lower dentition used to procline and it tend to come, the molars will tend to come forward to get in class 1 occlusion, class 1 molar relation. So how come this dental compensation happening? If our body is having a feedback mechanism to correct himself, why this compensation happens? Then occurrence of class 2 end-on relation is most often seen. Then why the situation? If our body having our own control mechanism or our own method of correcting the problem, how come class end-on relation there? It would have come in front and made it into a class 1 occlusion. Also, the theory was not capable of explaining the action of reversible headgear on maxilla. So all these were the drawbacks. The next theory is the theory of neurotrophism by Behrens in 1970. So he says the neurotrophism, unlike other nervous function, deal with non-impulsive conductive function of neurons, requires an additional cellular process by which trophic functions are carried out. This is basically nothing but the growth is controlled by the neural structures or the axoplasmic streaming. All the neural structures are involved in controlling growth. So the function by transport of neurosecretory material along nerve tracts are responsible for growth. There are three general categories of growth happening: neuroepithelial trophism, neurovisceral trophism, and neuromuscular trophism. So what is neuroepithelial trophism? Epithelial mitosis or the growth and synthesis are neurotrophically controlled. It is controlled by nerves, neurons, the axons. So if this control is absent, abnormal epithelial growth occurs. For example, they gave the presence of taste buds. Why the taste buds are present? Because it's entirely dependent on gustatory nerve innervation. If there are no nerve innervation, then the structures might not have been present. Then patients with facial hypoplasia or anatomic or physiological abnormalities of hard and soft tissue palate or cleft palate, all these happen as sensory defects, lack of sensation from the neurons, according to neurotrophism. So whether the growth of epithelial lined and covered orofacial capsule regulated trophically. So this was the question asked. It was against the theory. So now the second one is neuromuscular trophism. So according to this theory, the subpart of neurotrophism, skeletal muscle ontogenesis requires motor neuron innervation to proceed past the stage of myotosis. They say basically that the muscle, the growth of the muscle is controlled by neurons. For the growth to happen, there should always be a motor neuron innervation for that muscle. So there were some studies done to prove this, and the conclusion which was shown that the neurotrophism effect do not depend on presence of end plate, could be produced by a nerve, motor nerve, while the same nerve is totally incapable of eliciting a contractile response from the same muscle. So as we know, the muscle or the skeletal muscles are controlled by the motor nerve, which is capable of innervating the muscle as well as leading to the growth of the muscle. Now, neurotrophic material is diffusible and does not require end plate apparatus. The next theory is neurovisceral trophic. So, in orofacial region, salivary glands, the fat tissues or organs, they are trophically regulated, at least partially. So, the growth of all these structures are controlled by the neural stimulation. So, experimental data shows increase and decrease of mature salivary glands under trophic influence. Okay, studies have shown that unilateral cervical sympathectomy produces ipsilateral atrophy of cheek fat and orbital fat. Then the cervical sympathectomy or removing that entire segment of nerve which was supporting or which was stimulating that area, when it was removed, there was an atrophy seen. So this again proved that the growth at a particular area is controlled by the nerves or the neural stimulation. So as a conclusion for the entire chapter, the theories of growth, understanding growth is difficult yet fruitful to the orthodontist. A better treatment is rendered by predicting, modifying, correcting, or intercepting growth. At times, orthodontists take advantage of growth. All this is beneficial to the patient, which would otherwise cause delay or produce a different outcome. These are my references. Thank you. Thank you for your patient listening.